Well, chaos behind the scenes at the White House today, an expletive-filled rant from the man in charge of messaging.
And just when you thought the Trump presidency couldn't get any more controversial, along comes Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci with an interview that reveals a fight-to-the-death power struggle has broken out at the White House. Okay, KCAL9 political reporter Bryan joins us now with more on the story, which I guess he made a phone call to a reporter. This all started, right?
Yes, he did. That's exactly what happened. And the intensity in the White House of this is just as big as what's going on in Congress tonight. The Trump administration is not the first one to have arguments, disagreements, and even clashes among the high-ranking members of the team serving the president. That's nothing new. But what makes this different is the vile and obscene name-calling and the vitriol between the president's top advisors right out in the open. The intense infighting at the White House is becoming shockingly clear. Wednesday night, newly appointed White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci pointed the finger at the president's chief of staff, Reince Priebus, as the source of leaked classified information about Scaramucci's finances, the kind of leak that's driving President Trump crazy. However, it now appears the information was actually in a public file, not classified. Nonetheless, in an interview with The New Yorker posted online Thursday, Scaramucci's quoted as saying Reince is an expletive, paranoid, schizophrenic, a paranoiac. Scaramucci vented his fury in a phone conversation with The New Yorker White House correspondent Ryan Lizza, who told CNN about the call.
We had about a 9-minute conversation where he went through a lot of the problems he believes he's facing in the White House, problems he believes with Reince Priebus, the chief of staff, with people leaking. And the conversation started with him really, semi-aggressively trying to get me to tell him who my sources were.
And Scaramucci also blasted President Trump's chief strategist, Steve Bannon, with some malicious and degrading insults, saying, "I'm not Steve Bannon. I'm not trying to suck my own expletive. I'm not trying to build my own brand off the expletive strength of the president." Claremont McKenna College political science professor Jack Pitney says, while insider battles are nothing new in past administrations, this may be a new low in the decorum of high-ranking White House officials.
For a major official to be saying these things in public about other White House officials is absolutely bizarre. And it's serious because someday we're going to have a crisis and the White House is going to have to respond. And it's clear this White House is not ready for a crisis.
In response to the uproar over his use of such language and trashing fellow White House officials to a reporter, Scaramucci tweeted out this response without apology. "I sometimes use colorful language. I will refrain in this arena, but not give up the passionate fight for Donald Trump's agenda." Later, Scaramucci, the communications director, wrote he made a mistake in trusting a reporter, saying it won't happen again. Earlier in the day, Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, one of Scaramucci's targets, got a vote of support from the House Speaker.
Reince is a very close friend of mine. Reince is doing a fantastic job at the White House, and I believe he has the president's confidence.
But another high-ranking Trump official who may not have the president's confidence is Attorney General Jeff Sessions. He's been under fire from the president in a series of tweets for the past week. Sessions reacted to the presidential attacks in an interview Thursday with Fox News.
It's kind of hurtful, but the president of the United States is a strong leader. And in that, I'm confident I made the right decision, the decision that's consistent for the rule of law. An attorney general who doesn't follow the law is not very effective in leading the Department of Justice.
And on Capitol Hill, Republicans came to Sessions' defense, even warning the president not to fire him or special counsel Robert Mueller.
If Jeff Sessions is fired, there will be holy hell to pay. Any effort to go after Mueller could be the beginning of the end of the Trump presidency, unless Mueller did something wrong.
If you're thinking of making a recess appointment to push out the Attorney General, forget about it. The presidency isn't a bull, and this country isn't a china shop.
You know, I go to Washington and I see all these politicians.
Even the president's speech to the Boy Scout National Jamboree in West Virginia this week is now the target of critics because the speech, they said, had partisan political overtones. And now the Boy Scouts of America has issued a written apology to those in our scouting family who were offended by the political rhetoric that was inserted into the Jamboree. Now, tonight, the New York Times is reporting President Trump not only tolerates the bitter divisions and fierce infighting among his advisors, they say he encouraged Scaramucci to go after Reince Priebus. And at a White House briefing before the New Yorker article was posted, Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders framed the internal White House battles as a healthy competition. So, Jeff and Lena, I guess it's all in the eye of the beholder.
Dave, thank you so much.